Okay, well, I think that people are starting to join. We'll just give it a minute or two before we get started. Sarah, if I could ask you to add the stream text link to the chat, that would be great. Thanks. Thanks so much. Well, it's 10:01 Pacific time, and we have a good number of our registrants are with us already. So I think that we should probably get started, Noah, and give people and make sure that we're getting started on time.
Sounds good.
I can see that we have a question in the chat about how to engage in the session. So I'll just note that this is set up as a webinar in Zoom, which means participants don't automatically have their camera and microphone turned on. When we get to the question and answer period at the end of the session, we'll give you the option to raise your hand and we can promote you to panelist and bring you on camera to ask a question if you would like to. And we'll go over that in the accessibility features in a few slides. Great. Okay, well then, um, so I can see that Aaron has raised their hand. So our plan is to use the chat for questions for now, and then at the end of the session, when there's a when we get to Q&A, we'll give people the option to raise their hand and ask a question on camera if they would like to. So I hope that that's okay. Some complexities to using Zoom webinar. All right. Okay, well, let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We're so glad to have you here to talk about funding your accessibility projects in Canada in 2026. My name is Trish Kelly, and I'm the Managing Director of Untapped Accessibility. I'm logging in today from downtown Squamish, which is the unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. When we introduce ourselves at Untapped, we usually share why accessibility is important to us. For me, it's partly that I'm the child of a disabled parent. My mother had multiple disabilities, including mental health and substance use disorder. And in her 40s, she lost her hearing kind of overnight. And I saw her get pushed out of the workforce. A lot of the barriers she experienced back then have been mitigated or minimized by technology. So we have great auto captioning and captioning options in our meeting platforms. But some of the barriers she experienced, the ones that were related to attitudes and beliefs about what people with disabilities can or can't do, are still with us today. And so there's still much work to do. And I come to this work as an ally and also as someone who has experienced chronic illness throughout my life. And I'm so honored to do this work. So I'm really grateful to be here today with Noah from Easy Surf, and I'll give Noah a chance to introduce himself as well, and then we'll talk a little bit about our organizations as well. So thanks.
Great. Thanks, Trish. Hi, everyone. I'm Noah Senecal-Junkeer. I go by he, him pronouns, and I would typically be joining from the traditional ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, also known as Vancouver, but I'm currently away from home for medical treatment. And I'm one of the co-founders of EasySurf. I was brought into this work by a chronic pain disability that I acquired as an adult. It affects my mobility, so I'm a part-time wheelchair user, and it also affects my hands. So I use assistive technology when I'm on a computer, mainly dictation software, and seeing how many digital accessibility barriers impacted my professional and personal life is why I spend so much time and energy trying to remove them. So I'm really happy to be co-hosting the session with Trish today. Organizations we work with often have really great ideas on how to improve accessibility, but it's often the funding that gets in the way of implementing those. So we've been doing a lot to try to connect organizations with funding, and that's sort of been our pet project over the last little while. Um, so I guess back to you, Trish.
Thanks so much, Noah. We wanted to just tell you a bit about our organizations before we get into the content today. So, Untapped Accessibility has been around since October 2022, and in that time, we've become one of the leading accessibility consulting firms in Canada. We're a social enterprise and we're certified by Bisocial Canada. We have a dual mission to generate revenue for Open Doors Social Services Society and to create work opportunities for professionals with disabilities. And really proud of the stats from the work that we have done to date. We've worked with over 225 organizations to help them reach beyond compliance with accessibility legislation. We've trained over 7,000 people. We've helped create over 20 accessibility plans. And to date, over 16,000 hours have been contributed by disabled professionals helping to design the solutions to accessibility barriers for our clients. Um, this is a slide that you're welcome to reference later when you get the slide deck, just a little bit about the kinds of services we offer. You can see on this slide that I've included grant writing. This is something that I've helped many organizations with, many nonprofits over the years, and happy to support in that way. We also do provide training, audits for accessibility in many areas and support with identifying barriers through community engagement and policy scans. Um, so I'll hand it over to Noah to tell us a bit more about EasySurf.
Okay, great. So EasySurf, for those who haven't come across us, is we're a disability-led digital accessibility consultancy based in Vancouver. So our services are all provided by people with disabilities, meaning that we go beyond accessibility standards and really make sure that the recommendations we make, the products we build, create a great experience for people with disabilities. So we do website development, website audits, document accessibility, really most things that are related to digital, we're involved with. You can go to the next slide, please. Before we get into the content, just going to cover accessibility for today's session. I know we had some questions about that in the chat. So here are some of the things that we have been mindful to do. The slide deck was available ahead of time on request, and we're also going to send it to everyone after the session. We have live captions enabled with the option to view in stream text. I believe Sarah put the link in, but it might be higher up in the chat now. We also have an ASL interpreter, so you can pin them for your view if that's helpful. And there's a few different ways to engage today. You can use the chat. You can use the Q&A function. If you prefer to ask a question with your video on, if you just please raise your hand, we will put the video on. And after the session today, we're going to be sending everyone an aftercare package. We're going to talk a bit more about it at the end of the session, but it's going to include a lot of information about today, including some funding opportunities. Next slide, please. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to start with finding funding, where I'm going to go through different types of grants that are out there, who funds them, where to look. After that, Trish is going to walk us through setting priorities, writing applications. I'm going to come back in, talk a bit about strengthening your application, what funders look for. We're going to take a little break in the middle, and then we're going to cover measuring impact. We're going to share some success stories, talk a bit about how Untapped and EasySurf can support your organizations, and then have a Q&A. So if you have questions throughout, just note them down and we'll be sure to get to them at the end. Next slide, please. So starting with where to find the elusive funding. Next slide. So there are a few different types of grants, and we've chosen to break them down. The slides will be shared. I see a question in the chat. So we've chosen to break these down into three categories. The first is capital grants, and these are things like ramps, doors, accessible washrooms, recreation facilities, any sort of physical type of change to a space. They tend to be larger amounts of money and they come with longer timelines and often matching requirements. So you have to be ready for that. The second type is project grants. These cover things like training, tools, software, research, websites. These are the kinds of things that EasySurf and Untapped do a lot of work with. The dollar amounts are usually a bit smaller than capital grants, but the turnaround time going to be faster. The third type is operational and core funding. So these are staff and program costs. It's less common in the accessibility space, but they do exist, so worth knowing about, especially if you are an organization that does ongoing work in the accessibility area. Next slide, please. So grants can come from many different places, which can feel a little bit overwhelming, but it also means that there's a lot of options. So we've chosen to this is how we've chosen to break it down. We have federal, provincial, municipal, so all the levels of government. They are big sources of funding. And then we have foundations, corporations, and nonprofits. And the key difference here is foundations almost purely exist to fund projects. So they hold money and they fund projects that they believe are going to be beneficial. For-profit and nonprofit organizations may have segments that offer funding, but it's not core to what they do. So all good sources of funding, but uh, the point here being that we've got to understand that each funder is going to have their own goals, their own timeline, structure, eligibility. So it's important to consider this when you're applying. Like when you apply, really think about who is offering the funding, what are their objectives, and you want to clearly meet those objectives in your application. Next slide, please. Another thing to consider is the structure of the funding. So many grants, especially on the capital type of grants, they require you to contribute your own money. And the percentage you need to contribute is going to vary a lot depending on the funder. So sometimes they're going to fund 100% and you don't need to put any of your own money in. Other times it's only going to be, 50% or 35%. It could be a different number. There's no rule. There's also the option sometimes to do what's called in-kind contributions. This means donating things like volunteer hours, materials, something that has value but isn't just plain old cash. Another thing to watch for is continuation. Some grants require that your project keeps running after the funding ends. So that's something to really consider carefully. So before you apply, again, think about the structure. Do you need to contribute funds? Do you need to do something after? These are all things that you want to think about before going through the process of writing that application. Next slide, please. So the question that I get asked often is where do I find grants? And it's unfortunately a lot harder than it should be. The listings are scattered across many sources. Sometimes it's email lists or individual networks. People post them on their websites. You'll find them on social media. They can be really easy to miss. And I love finding solutions to problems. I'm the type of person that's always saying, oh, you know what? Someone should do something about this problem. And rarely can I actually do something. But in this case, EasySurf and Untapped, we're always looking for ways to support funding of accessibility projects. So on the next slide, if I haven't foreshadowed it enough, we created a grant finder, and we just launched it this week. So this is a free database. It's available on the EasySurf website under grants in the top navigation, and it lists every single accessibility specific grant that we could find in Canada. I think there's over 50 in there right now. I would have to double check the number. Um, we've also created alerts. So you can enter your email, and whenever a new grant is added, you'll receive an alert. I've got a screenshot. I've got a screenshot of our website on the slide right now, and we have a few different filtering categories. So you could filter by region, status, category, and all of those are going to link back to the actual grant itself to make it easy. You'll see it's a little small on the screen, but kind of in the top left, there's a link there that will allow you to sign up for the alerts. This is also version 1 of the Grant Finder. We're rebuilding our entire website, and I have lots of ideas for how to improve this, including customized alerts. So I'd be extremely appreciative for anyone who checks it out. If you have feedback or ideas or things that you want to see, this is the opportunity since we are rebuilding it. If I can implement your suggestion, I will do it. So I'll drop a link in the chat. And I'll also give the link that will take you to the email sign up. We can go to the next slide, please. I'm just going to grab that.
Yeah, Sarah already added the link
Oh,
to the
okay.
to your website to the
Oh,
grant
very
page.
fast.
So
Well, thank you,
thanks,
Sarah.
Sarah.
Okay.
And
Appreciate
you're
that.
already getting people saying congratulations and so
Oh,
cool. So
well, thank you so
wow,
much.
Noah, this is amazing. Like, thank you so much for taking the time and using your skills to create this support for everyone. I think it's amazing.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. That means a lot. Okay, so our poll question. So a few months ago, I asked people on LinkedIn whether they had applied for an accessibility grant in the past. And the vast majority of people in my network, which are really, it's a bit of an accessibility bubble, but the majority of people had not. And so as a follow-up in this session, I'd love to understand, what has held you back from applying for accessibility grants in the past, assuming that it has? Is it that you have not had enough time? You have not had clear priorities on what you need to be funded? Grants were hard to find. You could not match or contribute funding, or you didn't have a team to write. If I've missed an option there as well, you can put it in the chat if there's some other reason, or maybe you have applied for grants, but would love to see how our numbers come out here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can see the results like I can, Noah. So
I see them now, and
okay, great.
I will answer because I actually have not applied for a grant, and it is because
What's your answer?
not enough time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one. It can be very time intensive. Um, and I think just as a bit of history, we ran a webinar in January that was about who are the funders that have accessibility funding in 2026. And we had a whole panel of four different funders. We thought this is great. That was for BC. Let's do it for all of Canada. And when Nova was researching, we couldn't find anything that was open right now across Canada. So we kind of had this nice window, and now we're in a bit of a gap where there are not a lot of funds open at this time. Yeah, so it's difficult to stay on top of what's currently available, and that can be pretty daunting. Yeah, so the tool that you're sharing is going to be so helpful that way. Yeah, and so that looks like everyone has answered now. So I don't know if you want to, I'll just hit end poll, but it looks like the most often reasons, 14 out of 34 people, 41% said hard to find grants. And the highest one was not enough time. So yeah, thanks so much for answering. We've got a couple other answers in the chat as well. So I'm just sharing the results with everyone now, but a lack of internal support. Often the grants cover items that are very niche and take a lot of time, but are not for very valuable. No readiness as far as specific quotes. Yeah, that's often when it's built environment specific, they want you to have quotes from suppliers already on hand. So you have to have done that homework before you can even apply.
Okay, well,
Awesome.
thanks everyone. It's interesting that there was such a split. So it seems like there's a lot that gets in the way. Hopefully, we can help with some of those things. So I think over to you, Trish, for
Yeah.
the next part.
Okay, thanks. So I think with the work that Untapped does with organizations, we also hear that just deciding what to take action on next or where to start can be difficult. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about setting your priorities. I also see that there's a flag in the chat that some grants that are available, I think of things that are available through ESDC, so Employment Social Development Canada. There are quite a few grants that are related to research, and so that's great. We want to have the opportunity to dig into big questions, but it does mean you need to have researchers either on staff or you need to have connections to researchers in order to even consider applying for that. And that is a kind of specialization that not every service-focused organization also has both competencies. So that's another good challenge to note. Thanks. Okay, so in terms of setting priorities, a lot of our work is about identifying barriers. So I'm hopeful that you have some information about the barriers that are encountered by people with disabilities when they either access your physical space, if you have one, your services, or your online information. So these can be three key areas where you could look at the barriers that you know about, and look to which one might be a priority area for you. So that could look like improving the built environment in terms of doors, ramps, washrooms, signage. Some of those are pretty big ticket items, but others like wayfinding signage might be more doable, and you might be able to act on those sooner with a lower dollar grant. Services you could be looking at providing training to staff and volunteers in order to enhance the accessibility of how people engage with your organization. You could also look at improving your communications or your policies. You might have found that you have digital barriers, so maybe your website is not accessible. You might be using software that's not accessible, and that could be impacting your employees or the people you serve. You might have an amazing archive of old PDFs on your website that explain how to use your services, and they may not be accessible. So those are some digital barriers you might want to address. So we'd recommend that you consider prioritizing barriers that will have the greatest impact and make the biggest improvement for people with disabilities. I think that's a strong, compelling case to make in your grant application. And we'd also recommend that you consider the feedback that you've heard from people with disabilities themselves. And so if you've had feedback from people that use your services or your space, that should become more of a priority than something that you've stumbled upon without hearing from the people you serve. Very practically, though, you need to align what you're prioritizing with what the funder will fund. So a great project that doesn't match a funder's stated goals is not going to get funding. So if you've identified a particular area, you might need to put that to the side until another stream of funding comes available that fits with it. So you got to really dig into what they're saying are priorities. I think the Vancouver Foundation is an example of where they're really good at describing what they will fund, and they'll have a very good document that will also explain what's out of scope or what they won't fund. You can also look at their website to see in the last round of funding what kinds of projects they funded. That might give you an idea of what seems to be successful with that funder, and make sure that you aren't proposing something that's very similar to what got funded last year, because that might impact your chances as well. And just remember that a focused project is probably going to be more successful than one that's really broad. So try to be focused in what you're pitching. And then this is something that Noah and I have been talking about. I imagine some of you have heard of this terminology if you're lucky enough to have a fundraising team in your organization, or to hire a fundraiser who can write this for you. The terminology is a case for support. So this is kind of like the work that you do as an organization to develop your own story about what is a priority for you in terms of the actions you want to take. So it might be that a funding call comes up, you see something that you think, yeah, that we need that, and we could put together a really good proposal for that kind of funding. But you can use the idea of a case for support to build out that concept to say, we're going to pitch and we're going to apply for this particular grant, but we also are very convinced that this is work we must do. And so it allows you a place to really clarify what you're asking for funding for, and it becomes a reusable framework that you can then refer back to with the next grant that you consider applying for. So you have your disciplined approach of what you want to get funded, and then you modify it based on what the funding application is asking for, what will be funded. So to me, that's kind of, I think this is important to mention because, especially in the nonprofit world, we often hear about mission creep. If you wait for funding and you apply for grants based on what the funder wants to fund, but it's not aligned with what your actual priorities and your strategic plan or your goals for the organization, you can end up being a very unfocused organization. And that mission creep, as it's called, shows up in how you get funding as well as the impact you can have on community. So you need to be a bit disciplined. Um, we've created a template for just the heading structure that we're going to talk about today for a case for support document. So I believe that that's just been added to the chat. Thank you so much, Noah. So you're welcome to download that Word document now if you'd like and follow along and use it to kind of take some notes if you'd like to throughout the rest of the webinar, because we are going to walk kind of step by step through the areas that you need to develop in order to have that compelling case for support. So I'll give people just a moment to maybe get excited and download that. So I'm seeing a note from at least someone that's saying they're not sure if it's just them, but they don't see the downloadable doc. Okay. So that's interesting that Noah, they can't see it. So
That's
I
my
might,
fault. I sent it only
oh,
to the host and panelists. Let
okay.
me let me let
Oh,
me do
that's
it
such an easy
properly.
fix. Thank goodness.
Yeah,
Every time I do a webinar,
there
okay,
we
so
go.
Noah's
That should
tried
work.
again. Every time I do a webinar, I think I've finally mastered Zoom, and then something will happen that I realize I still have more to learn. But can someone let us know if now that Noah sent it to everyone, that can you get it? Yay! Woohoo! Okay. So if you want, you can open that up and we'll start going through all of the areas throughout the rest of the webinar. We will send it as part of the aftercare package as well. So if you don't want to be literally taking notes as we're going through the webinar, you'll have that later. So it's up to you, however you learn best. So the first piece for building your case for support is that idea of identifying a barrier. So we've talked a bit about that, and it's one of the prompts in the case for support template. So what barriers are you looking to address that impact people with disabilities? And thinking as well about who is affected. So the case for support is a framework, but it's also you're building a compelling story. So think about what a funder might want to understand about the barrier, especially if they're not accessibility experts. You need to think you might have people that are, skilled in minting grants, but not necessarily accessibility experts. So you want to really illustrate for them what the barriers you're looking to address are and how they impact people with disabilities and who the people are who would be affected by that. And then in terms of writing your application, another piece of the case for support is describing your organization. So you may already have this on your website. Um, yeah. You may have on your website or in your fundraising materials, you might already have what can be called a boilerplate, or maybe it's the About Us page on your website. So you probably have some text to start with, but make sure that when you're putting it into your case for support, that you include your mission and description of the communities that you serve. Other details like how long you've been, an organization could be helpful. Be clear about the need that you address, who benefits from your work, and how they benefit. Again, very practically, as we're thinking about how people apply for funding and the humans behind this process that need to read all the applications, we think it's really strategically a good idea to try to mirror the funding that's in the call from the funder. So read that funding call very closely, take a look at their website, try to use some of their language, read about what their priorities are, and then try to describe your organization in terms of how it aligns with that. And explain why right now is the moment for this project. So make this feel timely. Um, and oh, it looks like we've had a couple issues with folks trying to access the document in just in the chat. So Noah, being a digital accessibility expert, has popped it into a Google Drive and shared a link to the Google Drive in the chat as well. So there's an alternative way. So maybe I'll just pause for a moment. We can see if that someone can let us know if that worked. Okay, so great. We now have two options for people to access that template. And when you open up the template, you'll see the we have the your organization piece, which is what we're just talking about right now. So describing your organization. And then the idea of describing or demonstrating the barrier. So again, we are saying try to be specific, describe the barrier that you're looking to address and talk about who's impacted, how they're impacted. If there's any data that you can provide that would support the this barrier and why this barrier is something you want to address. So maybe you've done some surveying or you've heard feedback from the community. Maybe you've conducted focus groups or you found good research papers that talk about this barrier. Any of that is going to help build the case for why this barrier is a priority and why the funder should consider funding your project. And then you need to get into discussion about how the barrier can be removed. What are you going to do? Um, okay, so the second piece of building out your case for support is to look at describing the solution and who's shaping it. So, how will you remove the barrier? So, what's your approach? How are you going to solve this issue that you've now convinced the funder is so important that they should help you to solve it by giving you money? And why is your organization positioned to lead this work? So, this could be that maybe your organization is disability led or deaf led, and you have the connections and community trust to be the best organization to address this barrier, and that your solution will be most likely to be successful. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about the strengths of your organization and how that qualifies you or gives you the social license to take on this work for the communities that you work with. You will, of course, have to put together a budget, and that will be part of any grant application. It also is something you'll want to be clear on for your case for support. We recommend that you look at getting as specific as you can and itemizing everything that you're looking to get funding for, and then bring those into categories. As we talked about before, with bigger expenses or the larger dollar value grants, there will be a request that you provide actual quotes from vendors. So if you're looking to do something like add a ramp or have your website remediated or made accessible, you'll want to have vendor quotes already be putting the word out and getting those back in so that you know what the true cost will be, and so that you can show that you have qualified vendors already lined up. Um, Often, it's best practice to get two or three quotes. So you may have a supplier that you know does great work, but if you don't, you probably want to show that the option that you've chosen is a strong option and is good value for money. Make sure you're clear about what what is fundable and what's not in the grant call. So you don't want to spend your time digging in and getting quotes for things that won't be funded anyway. And connect each line to a project activity. So make sure that you are including all of the items in the budget in the narrative description of what you're planning to do and how it solves the accessibility barrier. And then don't forget to plan for accessibility service costs. So, for example, if there is a call from the federal government for disability serving organizations and their projects, make sure that you're speccing into your budget that you are going to have ASL interpretation and captioning in any media. make sure that you're ensuring that any documents that you create for the public are going to be accessible and available in multiple formats and capture the costs of those pieces. I know that aren't many grants that are holding space and have a separate line for that, but I think that we need to be doing the advocacy of capturing those costs and naming them in our budgets. This might be easier to do in a case for support where you are using your own format. And I think also another piece of the accessibility service costs would be ensuring that you're covering the idea of honorariums for any community members that are part of the project, making sure that people with disabilities who are involved are being compensated for their time and that you capture that in the budget as well. And so Noah was talking about contributions and those requirements sometimes around matching funds. So make sure that you're careful around how you're describing your contributions as the lead organization on a project and any partnerships that you're forming to deliver on the grant proposal. Make sure that when you have your case for support and then you look at a funding call, that you make sure that you shift the wording in the categories in the budget or the pieces to match what the funder has asked for. So if you've called it a budget, but they call it financial contributions, call it financial contributions, use their language. Um, List all the sources of your funding. So that could be you have another grant that is part of the matching funds that you have available, as opposed to it all coming out of your own operating budget. We also would recommend that if you're allowed, that you build in a contingency of 5 to 10% for any surprises that might come up in the project. You'll know in the funding call if this is allowed. But maybe if you were working on a pitch for a foundation where you got to use your own format, we would encourage you to include that. Also, many grants will allow you to have some way to capture some of your overall overhead costs, 10 to 15%. If it's there in the description of the grant and that it is allowed, make sure to include that in your budget. If it's not specified, I would recommend reaching out to the funder and asking them for clarification because you want to make sure that whatever you're asking for in your accessibility grant, that it's not harming your organization's sustainability overall, right? You want to make sure that you can actually afford to do that work without going into debt. So overhead can be one of those sneaky areas where if you haven't captured it, it could be a financially painful realization later. Be really clear about what's not eligible, what's ineligible. So, for example, if they won't cover full-time staff and they'll only cover project costs, you want to make sure that you do have another source to cover the funding for that staff position. And make sure that you are capturing any in-kind contributions from your organization and from your partners. So in-kind contributions can be things like the expertise or the use of office space or somewhere to gather and do community consultation. Put a dollar value to everything that you're contributing, so that you can show the value of what your organization brings and the level of detail you've gone to in planning this. And just a little bit about why applications seem to be rejected. So the priorities didn't align. The budget was not clear. So we talked about some of those already. The application didn't follow the funder's instructions. So it can be kind of overwhelming if you're applying for multiple grants at the same time. Just make sure that you really are following the instructions for that particular grant and aligning with it. Eligibility criteria. were not met can be a reason for rejection. So you need to be clear. For example, if you're a local government, can you apply for this funding, or is it only open for nonprofits? As a social enterprise leader, I know that there are things that I would love to apply for, but because we're a social enterprise and not a nonprofit with charity status, we're excluded from a lot of funding calls. So you need to make sure you're clear about that. Really practically though, you can do a great job of your grant application, but it may just be that there was more responses to the call for funding than they have budget to allocate. So if there are, if it's a national call and they have 200 responses and they were only planning on giving out 5 grants, then that's a lot of people that are going to get a no, and that has nothing to do with the, work and excellence behind their application. And I think especially right now where we see not a lot of grants are available at this time of year, the competition will be pretty steep. And then the final piece I already mentioned is just if your business structure doesn't fit with what they're willing to fund, then that can be an issue. So make sure you're clear on that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Noah to talk about strengthening your application.
Yeah, so as Trish mentioned, these funding opportunities are often very competitive. So a lot of time and effort should be put into strengthening your application to make your organization and project stand out. Um, if we go to our next slide, please. One of the best ways to achieve this is through the meaningful participation of people with disabilities. I think everyone on this call knows it's important to include people with disabilities. Funders also know this. It's of course the right thing to do, but it's also how a funder knows that your project is actually going to have the positive impact on the people it's meant to. And I want to just re-emphasize the word meaningful because we really recommend people going beyond inclusion. So it's not just that people with disabilities get a seat at the table, but that they are a key part of the decision-making process. And there's many ways that we can achieve meaningful participation. We've listed a few here. But the most important thing in order to have meaningful participation is we need to make sure that our entire process is actually accessible. So people with disabilities can't participate if there are barriers that block them from participating. So sorry. So for example, can people contribute remotely? Uh, in meetings, do we have ASL interpreters? The documents through which we communicate, are they accessible to people who use screen readers? Are we giving the meeting agenda in advance? There's so many things that we could consider. I can't list them all here, but we really need to take time to carefully think about accessibility throughout the entire project process. And the meaningful participation also means that we have people with disabilities on the project team. It means that the wider disability community was consulted. Uh, People with disabilities who provided feedback were compensated. And another important one, I know everything's important, but this one double important, but that's when people with disabilities provide feedback that we're actually taking action based on that feedback. Otherwise the feedback doesn't mean a whole lot. So we can go to our next slide here. And this is continuing our case for support. And this activity is really about thinking about um, how we can include people with disabilities in whatever projects that we have in mind. So if we could take a moment to just think about how can people with disabilities lead, shape, contribute to, or evaluate your work. Um, I think that's going to be, it's something that we see more often called out in funding applications, but it's definitely going to be something that's going to allow you to stand out. So we can go to the next slide, please. So funders are going to want to see your track record, and this is another opportunity to strengthen your application and maybe brag a bit. So this is where we want to share some examples of our past work. It's important to include metrics, but it's also important to include outcomes. So um, applications are going to be competitive. There's going to be, and they're probably going to want to compare you to other applicants. And an application that doesn't have enough metrics makes it difficult to compare And therefore, you may end up getting ranked lower because they just don't know how to sort of compare you to other people. And when it comes to metrics, I think any metric is good, but a metric around outcomes will be best. So, as an example, let's say that you were a municipality and you were applying for funding to improve the accessibility of playgrounds in your district. There is a grant that I did find about this, so this is a relevant example. And to demonstrate this, you wanted to demonstrate success that you've had improving accessibility in other outdoor recreation areas. So maybe you installed accessible beach mats at two beaches in your district. Um, and also that's something that there are grants for. Um, so there's nothing. So okay, sorry, one second. My phone keeps going off. Okay. Um, so you want to demonstrate this, and let's say you said over the last 3 years we installed an accessible beach mat at two beaches in our district. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a metric, but it's quantifying the result rather than an outcome. So a better approach would be to say, over the last 3 years, we installed an accessible beach mat on two beaches in our district. We found that after installation of the mat, the use of accessible parking spaces doubled. On an average weekend, more than 2,000 people used the beach mat, including those with wheelchairs, other walking aids, strollers, and beach carts. We found that overall beach visits increased 20%. So now, rather than talking about what you did, you're talking about what the outcome was. And the outcome was more people with disabilities were able to access this space. And we demonstrated it through three easy to track metrics. We're going to talk a bit more about measuring impact in a few slides, but I want to underline the importance is that it's not just to help you understand the outcome, which is important, but it's also to help you access future funding. So funders are going to want to know that their money is going to be put to good use, and this is how you show that. Last quick point. If you're a new organization and you don't have a track record, one thing you can do is look at the experience of the people on your team and talk about initiatives and experience that they have personally. So you're not talking about at the organizational level, but more individual level. That can be a meaningful alternative as well. So I think over to you, Trish.
Yeah, thanks. And I did notice there was a question in the chat related to the last slide with if your application is rejected, is it worth asking for any feedback or reasons behind the unsuccessful application? I wanted to note that yes, I think it is worth trying. I have had some success with getting funders to provide feedback about why our application was not successful. So it doesn't hurt to try. Just know that if they had a really high level of response to a funding call, they may not be able to get that feedback to you, or it may have been decided by a committee, and so it might be difficult for them to share that perspective. So yeah. One other piece that we wanted to talk about before we go to a quick break is the idea of applying plain language principles to how you write your case for support and how you respond to a funding application. Um, I don't know that many funders think of themselves as a key audience for plain language practices, but I use these practices when I'm writing a grant because although maybe the first audience we think of with using plain language is for people who have cognitive demands related to their disability that mean plain language is a strong option. I think of anyone involved in funding nonprofit grants as an audience that has really high cognitive demands. They could be looking at 200 applications. That could be every application might be in a different font or might be using a different format. Might be very wordy, might have a lot of jargon, like some of these pieces. So, writing in plain language is so beneficial for anyone that has a high cognitive load that I use the same principles when I'm writing a grant application. So some of those points are write and structure your application thinking about those grant managers or the committee that's reviewing it. Make sure that it's easy for them to find and understand the information that they asked for. If you can, so sometimes this is easier to do than in other cases, but follow the same order that is listed in the call for applications or proposals. Really just stay with the same order. Imagine that that person who is reviewing it might have the funding call open on one side of their screen and your application, and they might be trying to take notes. So if they can follow in the same sequence, there's a better chance of them getting the information that you wanted them to. If it's not just fields in an online form that you're completing, or if it allows you to do any kind of formatting, I would recommend using headings and point form lists to make it easier for them to compare and scan the information. Um, Also, you may feel really challenged by the word limits that are set into those little boxes in the application. If you're struggling to get your word count down to what the word count limit is in the application, you could try using AI to help you reduce the overall word count and then review it to make sure that your key points are still properly represented. This might be hard, but use familiar words and avoid jargon, as grant managers may not be experts in your particular field. I think this is difficult to do because I know when I'm writing a grant, I'm imagining the funder as this very powerful, almost all-knowing, omnipotent being that is evaluating my application. And so I feel tempted to use big words and to try to sound academic or like I'm a researcher. But that might not work for you if they don't have the subject matter expertise around accessibility or the work that you do. So try to keep it as familiar as you can and make sure to explain any terms, avoid acronyms that they might not know from your sector. Use an active voice and aim for one idea per sentence. Just avoid really long run-on sentences. There's a lot of cognitive demand for someone who has to read a sentence that has three commas in it. If something is a really long sentence, you might want to ask yourself if a point form list might be easier to read. And then another option is to consider asking someone outside of your sector, so a friend or a colleague, to review the application with fresh eyes and give you feedback. They can tell you, I don't understand this term. I don't know what this acronym means, and help you make it as easy to read and familiar as possible. So I think, speaking of cognitive load, I think we're now going to take just a 5-minute break. I know that we've provided a lot of information already, and some people had difficulty getting into that word template. So let's take 5 minutes and we'll come back to finish up the content and get to the Q&A. So we'll go for a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at, on my clock, 10:58. See you at 10:58. Hi, everyone. 1 minute. Oh, and now it's 10:58. So we should be getting started again. So exciting. People are using your grant tool already, Noah, and providing
I know.
feedback. That's so awesome. Noah, it's over to you for the next section.
Okay, great. Just to answer, I know there's just, I don't want these questions to get buried. I know Lindsay asked about the timing of grant applications. Are there certain times of the year where these streams open up? The pattern I've loosely noticed, but I don't know if this is fact, is that more show up towards the start of the year, like January, February, and then again in the fall, September to November area. But it's a little bit variable, but I tend to notice the summer being slower. Someone also asking about strategies to get funding to improve ergonomics for staff that help people with disabilities. So not directly involving accessibility for folks with disabilities. I think I would just reframe it in that if you're looking to get funding for ergonomics, that's to make your workplace more accessible for. So if you have staff that have disabilities, if you want to hire people with disabilities, that kind of thing. So I think it's less about improving accessibility for people who help people with disabilities and more about the people with disabilities. So I think ergonomics for sure, there are funds available for that. And I would just focus on making your workplace more accessible. Okay. Measuring and also, yeah, thank you for the kind words about the grant thing. We've been working on that for a while, so I'm really happy to hear that it's helpful. Measuring impact. I talked a little bit about this before the break. So just to reiterate, we want to measure our impact so that we understand the outcome, so that we can show funders that, money was used effectively. And it also helps us build our track record so that we can apply for more funding in the future. So if we go to the next slide, please. Um, there's so many things you can measure, and I've decided to break it up into easier and harder. Going back to the beach example, I wanted to focus on easier to measure metrics. So that's why I went with the usage of an accessible parking spot, the usage of the mat. Maybe we could have sensors in these spots that just count, which doesn't seem too complicated. Same thing for measuring the number of beach visits. Um, and the same thing goes for things like counting the number of structures that were built, the number of survey responses, the amount of equipment that was provided. And I chose to split it up between easier and harder because sometimes you're only going to get a short window of time to collect and measure your outcomes. So it's good to upfront identify what are those easy things that we can measure, and you want to measure as many of those as you possibly can. On the harder side, we have things like attitude change, long-term data, uh, quantifying the number of people that still encounter barriers. These are going to be harder to measure. And that's not to say that you shouldn't, but you might not be able to measure all of them. So again, at the start of your project, think about what are those harder to measure metrics and which, if any of them, are you going to try to measure? Because similarly to the easy ones, there also might be a limited window of time. So you don't want to be a year down the road and say, oh, I wish we gathered such data because it would have helped us. Well, now it's too late. So just something you want to think about. And this leads us into our next activity on the next slide, please, which is really about showing the impact of your work. Going back to our case for support, thinking about the things that we've listed there, what is going to change when this work is done, and how are we going to know? These are important things to think about when we're building out that case for support. Um, and we can jump to the next slide, which is pretty much the final activity of building the case for support, which is the funding side of things. So we've gone through 4 steps in building this case for support, and we've listed out barriers, how we're going to include people with disabilities, how we're going to remove the barriers, how we are going to measure things. And now it's time to think about those cost categories. So, what are some of the key cost categories that we're going to need in order to be able to carry out this work? Also, something important to be able to do, as Trish mentioned, you might need to get quotes from vendors. So these are all important things to have in place so that when those funding opportunities come up, you're able to apply more quickly. On the next slide, please. So once we've done these 5 activities, I'm hoping that you have a strong outline for your for support. So in the next few days or weeks, I would encourage everyone to try to finish building that case for support because this is going to make funding applications significantly less daunting. And I think that is what gets in the way of a lot of people applying, myself included. So the next time you discover a new funding opportunity, maybe it comes through your email inbox, you're going to have that framework to build on, and you'll be able to adapt the case for support into a very strong application. On the next slide, please. Just closing out the application section with some words of encouragement because the reality is most grant applications are rejected. There is more demand for funding than there is actual funding available. But the encouraging thing is that all is not lost if your application gets denied. There's a lot to learn from a rejected application. I know somebody asked about asking for feedback. I think that's something worth doing. I know this is something that certain funders are able to do, and it's going to help you on your next application. We can also think in this application that I put together, what can I repurpose? So are there sections that were really strong that we put a lot of thought into? Can we take those and put them aside so that they can be reused in the future, which is going to save us some time? And the last thing that I think people sometimes forget about is just continue to build their relationship with the funder. Stay in touch, send them updates about initiatives that you've been involved in. I think this relationship building is going to go a long way. So I'll turn it over to Trish to talk about some success stories.
Thanks. And I was just noticing a comment in the chat that maybe I can pick up on before we lose it. So someone has shared the value of building partnerships and collaborating on grant applications. I think that that's definitely something to consider, and maybe a lens to consider in terms of how you build relationships with peer organizations or and why. So I think about we have a partner who is a disability serving organization, um, does a lot of direct service, but doesn't have a research arm. And so when a grant call was posted that looked at service delivery, but also from a research perspective, we were able to partner with them to put together a proposal. So Untapped had capacity that the organization that was more focused on really directly helping people in the community didn't necessarily have the competency on their team. So you might find that you can build those sorts of relationships, but that doesn't happen overnight. It would be difficult to see a funding call tomorrow and decide to just reach out to an organization that you think would be a good partner and start an application together. You need to do some work to establish, that your values aligned, that your idea for the grant is in alignment, and maybe even set up a memorandum of understanding or some kind of written agreement about roles and responsibilities. So it is a longer term project to get to that place where you can apply together. Um, and nice to see someone noting that their accessibility advisory committee is involved in their grant application process. So we wanted to just share a couple practical examples of some successful projects that we've worked with that leveraged grants. So from Untapped's perspective, I'm going to highlight a large project, which was developing e-learning for an entire organization. In this case, it was a regional government. So their challenge that they were, or the barrier that they were trying to address was the attitudinal barriers, so the lack of understanding and awareness for their staff that they have currently, but also future staff in terms of understanding accessibility. So they wanted to create a way for staff to build their knowledge at their own pace. So instead of inviting them to a workshop, let them do it on their own time when it works with their schedule. So Untapped worked with them to design a 2-hour Foundations of Accessibility online course that would be for all staff. And This project received funding, so the budget range we're talking about for something like this is 25 to $40,000. The course that was developed was a 45-minute online course for the existing staff and elected officials at this organization so that they could understand key concepts and legislative requirements and also the perspectives of disabled community members. So part of the e-learning included video interviews with disabled community members talking about barriers in the community that they had experienced. Um, and the impact of this was an enduring learning opportunity that could be used with current staff, but also, especially in a local government setting where every 4 years you have new elected officials who come on board who may not know anything about accessibility. Having something like an e-learning course that's available to bring them up to speed and onboard them was really important to this organization. Um, so that's a little bit about a project that we worked on, and then I'll pass it over to Noah to talk about an Easy Surf project.
Great, thanks, Trish. So the project I'm sharing is one we delivered for NDMS, which is a disability organization based in Nunavut. And they had a site that was outdated. It had numerous accessibility barriers for people who use assistive technology. And they also wanted to refresh the design and structure of the site. So this was a really good opportunity to just rebuild the website because we can do two things, which is remove accessibility barriers while also achieving their other goals like better design, better structure, easier to find information. So for this project, we fully rebuilt the site using WordPress. We did development, design, accessibility testing, and provided training for their team so that any new content that would be added to the website would also follow accessibility standards. And this impact here was significant. And it almost always is when we get to do a rebuild. And that's because the new website now conforms to accessibility standards. But most importantly, our testing demonstrated that people who use assistive technology found the website easy to navigate, information was easy to find, and areas of the site where information was previously hard to access was now easy to access. And that's going to be really crucial for this organization, which is serving people with disabilities. So on the next slide, just talking a little bit about how we can help. And EasySurf and Untapped can really help with pretty much any area of the funding journey. So we have the grant database that we mentioned, the alerts that I mentioned, that can help you find new opportunities. Trish and Untapped can help you write applications, review applications before you submit. And depending on the project, once you get funding, we may also be able to help you successfully carry out that project, whether that's a new website or an audit from EasySurf, or that's training or disability community engagement or workplace accessibility from Untapped. Really, anything you have in mind, just check out the services that we offer and let us know if we can help. Collectively, we have helped hundreds of customers across Canada. Next slide, please. So Trish is famous for her aftercare packages that a lot of
Am
effort
I?
goes into them. So just letting you know that next week everyone's going to receive several things. So the slide deck, the case for support template. I know hopefully everyone has it, but you'll get that again. A captioned recording of the session, transcripts, event summary. And if you, yeah, and feel free to go ahead and share that with anyone who may have missed the event as well. So over to Trish for the evaluation stuff.
So a couple more things we wanted to mention before we get to Q&A. We would really appreciate hearing your feedback about today's session. We know you spent your valuable time with us, and we'd like to know what we did well and what we could do better next time. So we have a SurveyMonkey link here and a QR code that you can scan. And thank you, Sarah, for adding the QR code to the link to the chat. You're welcome to follow that link and let us know how we did and what you might want to see next time. And then I also am going to give a plug for our next webinar. I saw we have a few people who are champions of plain language. Our next webinar from Untapped is on June 18th, so just a little under a month from now. And the topic will be plain language for employers. So we often think of plain language as something that communications teams need to understand, but there's lots of ways it applies to talent attraction and creating an accessible employment experience. So we're inviting people to register for this session and bring a one-page document, maybe a job posting, a policy, or some piece of candidate communication, maybe the instructions that someone gets when you set up an interview with them. And you'll workshop that on your own as we move through the principles of plain language and train you on some of those key concepts. So that's on June 18th. It's free. This is a free workshop. Yes. So it's an hour and a half long. And yeah, if someone could add the plain language employers link to the chat, that would be great. Um, and you can also scan that QR code to register. So it is a free workshop. If you fall in love with it and want more training on plain language, Untapped has a 3-hour workshop that we can offer on plain language, and that would have a cost, but this one is free. Um, and uh, and then we've got our contact information, which is in the slide deck, so you can email us, visit our websites or book a meeting with us. And yeah, and then I think we're going to get to Q&A now. So it's probably easiest for me if I take the slides down so that if we do have anyone who would like to come on camera and ask a question, either in ASL or if someone is more comfortable sharing verbally, we can make that happen. It'll just be easier if I don't have slides to show. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the list of participants to see if there are any attendees that have their hand up. Not seeing anyone yet. And I think we've been covering the questions in the chat as we've been going along. So maybe I'll just check in and ask Noah or Sarah, have you noticed anything that we missed
I-
um, getting back to?
I'm going through and checking it out. Um,
Oh, here's a question. Speaking of the timing of grant applications, are there certain months or time of year in particular that granting streams open up? I think, Noah, you mentioned that a bit earlier, that it looks like early in the year and then in the fall seem to have a bit more um, open calls. It used to be that Accessibility Week, which is the first week of June, we would see some kind of grants announced from the federal government and from often the BC government. I don't know if we're going to see that this year, but that also has been a time to keep your eyes open. But now that you have Noah's tool, you can get an alert. Yeah, I'm seeing people sharing their thanks for this webinar, but I'm not seeing any other questions. We're willing to lurk for a minute or two longer, just to see if anyone has anything that pops up for them that they'd like to ask before they log off. Okay, so we have Maria has a question. Maria, would you like me to promote you to panelist so you can be on camera? Maria, I've just made you a panelist, which means you should be able to now turn on your camera if you would like to. Oh, okay. So, or you can just ignore that and, okay, Maria's asked a question that maybe we missed. So, Maria's going to look through the chat to see where it is and paste it again. And there is a question in the chat. Uh, do you see municipalities being successful or just nonprofits? Um, that is a good question. I have seen funding calls from Disability Alliance BC and the Rick Hansen Foundation provide funding to local governments and municipalities. And I believe that under some of the streams at the Vancouver Foundation, you can also apply as a municipality. So I think there are quite a few options. And then the Spark BC grant, Noah, that's still open as far as I
Yeah,
know. Yeah, that's
yeah.
available only to local governments at this stage, although I had heard they were going to open it up further. So I do think municipalities have a strong role to play in funding applications because often you can be that convener and bring several organizations together and have a bigger impact. And so your role as a convener is something that you can include in your in-kind contributions and in how you frame the potential impact of the project.
Just on the AODA question, so someone was asking, are there grants to support AODA compliance? There definitely are, and I have seen some come through, and I'm looking at my tool. There is one, the one that did come to my mind, it's closed right now. It's called the Enhancing Access to Spaces for Everyone, or EASE grant. Um, but this one does open annually. So it closed on May 7th, but it will open next spring. So spring 2027, you can watch for that one. And that one tends to be a bit more on the physical side. So washrooms, ramps, elevators, mobility mats, travel, things like that. But I believe I have seen what I would do is just filter for Ontario, and I have definitely seen grants that at least mention AODA as part of it.
It looks like Maria found the question that they'd put into the chat earlier. And Noah, I know you did answer this one around the idea of ergonomics for staff versus supporting the people that are served by the organization with disability. So maybe I know that you suggested reframing it to consider when you provide ergonomics for staff, you are improving accessibility for not just the people with disabilities you know about, but the staff you have today and future staff with disabilities. So I think a reframing was your advice there. And it made me think about a couple of years ago, Small Business BC had funding that was they were administering for the federal government that was looking at workplace accessibility grants on a small scale, small dollar value, but it, organizations were able to apply for funding for things like ergonomics, like stand-up desks, because those are accessibility supports. Yeah, I think it's part of how you position it. And then I also would say I hope every organization gets to a point where they have an accessibility supports budget line in their organizational budget where you're planning that you are going to need to provide ergonomics or accommodation supports for employees because you want to be inclusive and accessible. So you might not have a lot of money to put there now, but even just creating an accounting code, like you have one for postage, you have one for office supplies, having an accounting code for accessibility supports will start to normalize it in your organization, and you might have a chance to continually track what you have spent and set a new budget the next year that will cover at least that amount. That's what I do at Untapped Accessibility. I make sure that we have a special accounting code for it um, and track it as an organization. There's another question in the chat. I have a question about one of your success stories, the online training. Was it open access and how were you able to maintain it after the grant was over? So, great question. In this particular case, the training that we developed was imported into a learning management system that the local government had access to. So they had a partnership with their regional library and were able to upload the course into the regional library's software system. So they didn't have to pay an ongoing cost for hosting the course. So you're right that the funding call or the grant didn't cover ongoing costs for maintaining the learning management system, but the regional government was able to get creative and figure that out. Maybe in the future they might be able to contribute a little bit towards the annual costs of maintaining that learning management system, but the library already had a budget to cover that cost. So that was a good example of partnership. And also a follow-up question about copyright. So the municipality, or sorry, the regional government in that case owns the copyright on that course. It's theirs. It includes interviews with residents of their communities with disabilities. It talks about their accessibility plan for the region. It's very specific to them, so it's not open to just anyone. It's only for their staff and elected officials and volunteers if they want that. Yeah, awesome. No, is there anything else you'd like to say before we let people get on to the rest of their day?
No, just thank you for so much engaging questions. It's fun to do these when I see everyone participating so much. So yeah, just happy to have everyone take the time to join, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take good care. Bye.